Welcome back to another episode of the Lender Podcast. I'm Bryce Matheson, and as always, this episode is brought to you by Lender. Lender is a hard money and private money origination and servicing tool. So if you're currently using Excel to manage your current loan portfolio, and you're just kind of feeling overwhelmed with juggling all the different moving pieces of extensions and payoffs and late fees and collecting payments and just making sure that everything is correct, I highly recommend that you check out Lender. You can go to that by going to joinlender, lendr.com, joinlender.com, and check that out. Highly recommend it. It has completely transformed our business and the way we do things. And quite literally, our lending business just doesn't take that long to manage anymore because Lender handles all of it for us. So again, highly recommend you check that out at joinlender.com. Okay, today's episode is going to be a relatively short one, but I want to share this secret little tip for raising capital. And it's really not necessarily a secret, but it makes for a good clickbaity title. So just bear with me. In private lending, raising capital, it is difficult. At least I believe it is difficult. There's a lot of moving pieces behind it. You have to be very present. You have to be visible. It is relatively difficult to raise capital simply because people just only invest money with people that they know, like, and trust, plain and simple. It does require a lot of trust to give somebody $100,000 and say, here you go invest it, do as you please. That being said, it's not impossible, not by any stretch of the imagination. In 2024, we raised $1.5 million in capital, but I have friends who have $50 million lending funds, and they're actively turning away capital simply because they don't have enough deals. And it seems to me, as I talk to people on this higher echelon, higher tier of in their lending business, it seems to get that way that soon the capital outpaces your deal flow. And so you do actually have to start churning away capital. So I know in the beginning when you're small, it feels like, man, if only I had $10 million that I would be doing tons and tons of deals, but that's really just not that realistic because your business has to grow organically as you grow the capital at the same time. Now, one thing that a lot of brand new lenders don't really think about is the way that your capital compounds. So for example, right now we have around 17 different capital investors, and that comprises around 3 million or so in capital. But if you look at our breakdown of all of our different capital investors, out of those 17 investors, we have 2 who actively choose to have their interest earnings dispersed to them at the end of the month. And so that means that 15 of our lenders do not. They want to have their capital reinvested just so it compounds and grows over time. And I have found this to be fairly common in the industry that most of your investors will more than likely want it to compound so that it grows over time. But what people don't realize is if you pay your capital investors 10% annually, that means your capital is also growing at 10% annually. So $3 million a year, if you do nothing and you just hang on to the existing investors that you have, obviously be good to them, be transparent, keep them informed, all the above so that they're happy with you. As long as you keep your investors happy, that $3 million is going to churn into $300,000 by the end of the year. And so like I said, I talk to a lot of people who they say capital is not the problem. That's because when you have a $40 million fund at 10%, you're making $4 million a year in additional capital that's getting added to your capital stack. For a lot of people who are like, okay, cool, how does that help me? Like, I'm still short on capital. It doesn't really help you. And that's okay. That's not the point of this episode. It's just something that a lot of lenders don't think about is that your capital does grow over time organically, whether you're actively out there raising capital or not. A lot of people are like, okay, I have $2 million in capital. I want to be at $3 million by the end of the year. Even if you did nothing today and nothing for the rest of the year and you don't raise another dollar for the rest of the year, your capital stack is still going to grow. So as you get up into 8 million, 10 million, 12 million, that's $1.2 million a year that gets added to your business. And, sometimes you may have to give some capital back. You may have to say, hey, we don't have enough deal flow to handle this, and you do have to give some principal back to investors or whatever it may be. Or what you can do is you can use this as an opportunity to kind of like naturally transition out some of those other capital investors that you're paying more. So for example, when we got started, we still do, we have some investors that we're paying 12% annually. 12% is very high in the industry. And any new investors that we bring on now, they do not make 12%. Right now, they're anywhere between 9 and 10.5%. And so another opportunity that you have is as your capital grows, and if you don't have enough deal flow to replace those, obviously if you do have deal flow, great, use that money. But if you don't, use that as an opportunity to slowly transition some of these higher earned investors just out. And you don't necessarily have to have like a big conversation with them and say, hey, we're so sorry, but we're at a different rate. And like, no, you don't have to have that discussion at all. You can just slowly not put them into new deals. And this goes for mostly like if you're doing direct placement or the co-lending model. If you're in the fund model, that probably differs. But you may have some investors that reach out and be like, hey, when can you get me into the next deal? And just say, sorry, we don't have anything coming up right now. Or you can use that as a pivot point to say, hey, we do have some deals right now, but it's at a lower interest rate than you were in previously. So I understand if that doesn't work for you, we might have some other ones in the future that we need you for, but you'll sit on the sidelines until then. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling now at this point, but all that to say that you do hit a point where your capital grows organically, and you may want to scale faster and further beyond that. But just something, just a friendly reminder that your capital will grow on its own, whether you do something or nothing at all. And that's been comforting to me because I can slowly see my capital stack slowly climbing, even if I'm not as aggressive on the active capital raising piece of it all. So take that for what it's worth. I hope that's helpful. We'll catch you next week.